Hello! Before we get started on real neoliberalism, just earlier today I attended the first class of my new data science class, Data 259, Data Ethics, Responsibility, and Fairness. And in that class, boy, it is an hour and 20 minutes long. And you think at the beginning that taking a class Tuesdays and Thursdays for an hour 20 is better than taking 3 days for 50 minutes each. And every time I fall for it, but then I take it and then 50 minutes pass, I'm like, dang, I have 30 minutes left. And it grates on you. And then before you realize it, it hits a level of mental anguish and sorrow and exhaustion that no 50-minute class could ever come close to. But regardless, I know what I signed up for, and I do appreciate the fact that when you take a lot of Tuesday, Thursdays classes, you kind of get like a 4-day weekend. So I'm gonna live with it, and we're gonna see what we got. But let's talk about that class. Data Ethics 259. It sucks. The class sucks. Not because of the professors are great. I have a professor, her name is Amy Nussbaum. She's a great professor. I learned, we did mathematical foundations for data science a couple of years back. I don't know if it was last year or 2 years ago because my memory on that is kind of a little hazy, but it was a great series. And she's a great teacher. We got through the material, even though in some parts were a little bit technical. We got through it all right, and I learned a lot. It was probably one of my favorite classes. She's a good teacher, so this isn't about the professors. So why does the class suck? Is it because of the students? No, the students are fine, or at least they're not anything different from a regular class. So why does it suck? The class sucks because of the way that it is structured. So we have 4 different types of assignments, or 4 different ways of which we're grading that contributes to the final grade. First of all, we have attendance, and that attendance is split up into 3 subsections. We have actual attendance and like answering questions. That's one part of attendance. Then, or the official grade category is called participation. So one category of participation is attendance, showing up to class and answering questions. A second part of attendance is answering ed, which is ed is basically like an academic version of a forum in the same way that Slack is a formal version of Discord. So we're asking and answering questions on ed, and your participation level contributes to your grade. And then sometimes we may even have an in-class exam, and this contributes to participation. So that's that. I already kind of feel a little iffy about participation because if you know the material, I get it. I understand they want you to go to class. I understand it. But you would think that the final grade, my philosophy is that a final grade should be more results oriented rather than effort oriented, but that's fine. So what's the other categories? Well, now we also have this thing called reading response, which is 12 different reading assignments that are all on some level of reading material, whether it be reading a book, reading an article, watching a podcast that they've selected out for you, or many other different things. And then we have to write an assignment where, number one, we pick out a section from it and then we just write it by handwriting onto a piece of notebook, into a notebook. And then there's another area where we ask some questions about it. Then we write our general thoughts and summarize what we saw in the content. And then finally, at the end, then we do give our impressions going forward. Like, what's your final thoughts? After you summarize it, what's your final thoughts? And so that's the reading report. Now, that in isolation isn't too fine, but no, we have 2 more seconds left. Okay, what are the other 2 sections? Well, now we also have data intensive assignments, or rather programming assignments. We have 4 of these. And each programming assignment is where you have to do the assignment, you read this, and then you have to write code in Quarto Markdown format, which means that you write code and then you render it to a PDF, and that will give you a mix of text and latex, and then maybe some visualizations. And you put all that, and then it creates a document. If you know what you're doing, maybe you can get it done in a couple hours, but otherwise, it takes a little longer. So we have that, and we have 4 of those. And then lastly, all of this that I added up to, the 3 sections I added to, it just adds up to 50% of the final exam, because now we have one last one, and that is the final project. The final project is, it's so many details I don't even want to explain to you, but basically you answer a question, and then you find a question, and then you have to answer it, and it requires oftentimes getting some external data sets, and then you have to like talk about your methodology, and then you have to talk about, and then obviously it has to have a very direct application to data privacy and ethics. And then you have to work as a group, so you have to do some communications, and then there's like weekly check-ins, and then you have to do a presentation, and then you have to produce some deliverable, and you have to do all sorts of things. And if you mess them up, you're gonna get dinged. So we have in one class 4 different types of assignments. We have attendance, then we have weekly, or actually more than weekly, reading reports, and then we have programming assignments, and then we have a final project. And you kind of wonder, what is the goal of class? What is the goal of class? There's many different interpretations, but my personal interpretation of class is to learn the content. Yes, in some ways it's to learn about how to participate in society and learn different things and be used to working in a workplace or whatever. But it's to understand the core content. If I was designing a class, you know what I would do? There would be 3 assignments, 2 terms, 2 midterms, and 1 final. 25% for midterm 1, 25% for midterm 2, and 50% for midterm and for the final. Or alternatively, because some people may not do so great on a midterm or even miss one, but then they do very good on a final, which demonstrates that they understand the material. Then you could do 15% on midterm 1, 15% on midterm 2, and 70% on the final. And then you take the best of each weighted average of 25, 25, 50, you get the weighted average of that, 15, 15, 70, the weighted average of that one, and then you take the best one, and that's your grade. So the responsibility on the student is to understand the content, and then show up to class, take that 2-hour paper exam 3 times, and then you see what happens. And I guarantee you that would be, not only would it lead to better understanding of the material and getting something out of it, but it would just be a lot cleaner. Because what I hate about college classes is having to scavenge through Canvas, Gradescope, GitHub, Ed, which as I said is the educational version of like a Reddit thread or a Reddit subreddit. And then I'm checking like emails for like different things. Okay, why do I have to check 5 different things just to make sure that I don't miss assignments? Why not have 3 assignments in the entire quarter? We're on a quarter system. 3 assignments. Midterm 1, midterm 2, final. And then it's the responsibility, and then you can have assignments, but they're optional assignments. And it's the responsibility of the student to understand the material. But alas, we don't have that. Now let's talk about the real reason why we're here. We're here to talk about real shit, specifically real neoliberalism. I am convinced that neoliberalism is going to be the way of the future. What does neoliberalism work for me? There's many interpretations. You see stuff like in some aspects, it might be like a Milton Friedman ideology of hyper deregulation, hyper cutthroat capitalism. It might be just breaking up things and breaking up unions and trying to, be a greedy capitalist, but that's not exactly my interpretation. Sure, there might be some overlaps in terms of free markets and a general in the direction of deregulation, but for me, it's a little bit different. Let me explain to you my definition of real neoliberalism. I break it up into 6 pillars. 1, austerity. 2, free trade. 3, high-skilled immigration. 4, free markets. 5, civil liberties. And 6, social compassion. Let's start with the first one, austerity. We need a level of fiscal responsibility. And part of that is understanding that you're going to have to reduce the deficit, and quite aggressively, especially in the context of what we are in the United States with our expanding national debt and our 6-7% annual deficits, 6-7% of GDP deficits, we need to address that. The fact that our government expenditure is 40% higher than what they're taking in terms of tax revenue, it's not sustainable. So that's one. Two, free trade. Global trade has been one of the primary engines of global prosperity over the last 70, 80, or 80 years. So and global trade is just one of the most unanimous decisions among economists, is that global trade and free trade can allow us to take advantage of comparative advantage, to decrease prices for consumers and overall improve economic growth. High-skilled immigration is crack. It's rather not crack, steroids for the economy. It is between 1990 and 2010, between 30 and 50% of all productivity gains in the United States. This means counting all sectors, counting all reasons. 30 to 50% of all productivity gains in the United States have been downstream from the H-1B program. That is unbelievable. Unbelievable. High-skilled immigration is unbelievably beneficial for the economy. And it's time that we have somebody who's full-throated and ready to advocate for it. Let's move on to the fourth one, free markets. I generally lean in the direction that free markets are an engine for prosperity. 5, civil liberties. And what we saw, that's freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and general just liberties that we may take for granted, but we shouldn't take for granted. And especially when you see, around 20 days ago, we saw the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Maybe I don't like a lot of what he advocated for. I definitely don't, but there's no place in this country for political violence. And in that sense, it is quite sad. And it's representative of a country that, of a type of values that we should not, it's type of political violence we should never celebrate that shit. Okay. And lastly, social compassion. What is social compassion? It means having a level of understanding and empathy for people who are different than you, who have different backgrounds than you, who have different perspectives than you, who have different ideas than you, and understanding that a lot of people, they believe what they believe because they sincerely believe that it's the correct, that it's going to have a net positive effect, not just on themselves, but on society. Sure, there's a lot of people that are driven by some of the ugly emotions like grievance and vengeance. But a lot of people sincerely believe in wanting to improve society. And if you can try to understand their perspective, it can allow you to have a more comprehensive view of the world. I think we should have a level of social compassion. And then of course, part of social compassion is having some understanding and empathy particularly for those who are a little bit disadvantaged, and this goes into, it doesn't have to particularly be advocacy, but just we are all better off when we're all better off and we treat people with a level of respect, even if they're different. And having a little bit of a tolerance for weirdness and a little bit of a tolerance for things that don't quite fit our view of the world, and understanding that everybody's a little bit different. That's what I mean by social compassion. But you hear a lot of these things. You hear things about like reverence for free speech and reverence for free markets and all this, and you say like, okay, that sounds kind of conservative, right? That could be kind of conservative or fiscally conservative. And you hear me talking about like, maybe we're probably going to have to do some level of spending reform. That sounds conservative. Wouldn't that align you with the Republican Party? Would it? Okay, let's do it. Let's go down the list and see what's up, okay? Because I look at this latest administration, and this latest administration is probably the complete polar opposite of what I just described as the main foundations of real neoliberalism. Let's start with austerity. The Republican Party has never been fiscally responsible. It is absurd the degree to which they have always had the reputation or had the benefit of the doubt when it comes to fiscal responsibility. When the truth of the fact is, whenever they have unilateral control of Congress, they never reduce the debt. So why is this the case? Why do we hear this? I don't know. Maybe it's because they pay lip service to it. But the truth of the matter is, they never do. Reagan, I believe, tripled the national debt. Okay? H.W. Bush didn't do very much in regards to it. George W. Bush didn't do very much in regards to it. And you can give him some excuses for Iraq, but he passed some tax cuts that probably weren't even necessary. And then Trump is just, I don't even know how to get into this. This dude is like literally does not give a shit at all about fiscal responsibility, right? He is overseeing some of the most insane deficits we're seeing, okay, during both administrations, okay? Tax cuts is not fiscally responsible. Just tax cuts, they just do tax cuts. Tax cuts aren't free, okay? Tax cuts aren't free. And that doesn't mean you never do tax cuts, but it needs to be contextual. There needs to be a solid reason for it. You have to take into account the deficits. You have to take into account whether they're going to actually spur an economic growth, and usually and also whether you're going to offset them with spending cuts and on the other side. And when I mean spending cuts, I mean cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, because I never want to hear that lie that you hear from Republicans of getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. That is a cop-out that they use to get rid of the fact that if you want to do tax cuts and you don't want to explode the deficit, which would harm the long-term economic health of the country, then you have to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and they'll never tell the truth. But when the time comes, like we saw in the Big Beautiful Bill, they do understand that you have to cut Medicaid if you want to do tax cuts. But they didn't even do it completely. The rest they offset it by going into debt. It's just horrible. The Republican Party is not fiscally responsible. Not just this latest administration, but a lot of them. They're not. You know who was fiscally responsible? You know who the last two presidents that actually were fiscally responsible? Barack Obama's second term, where he oversaw the deficit getting reduced quite considerably from the time of the beginning of his second administration all the way to the last, where I believe it was about $600 billion annual deficit. Very impressive. And then Bill Clinton, who oversaw back-to-back years of budget surpluses, who was actually serious about both increasing what was at the time unsustainably low or irresponsibly low top marginal tax rate of 31% up to 39%, and then also doing some very meaningful spending reform in the 1996 bill, and even introducing the line item veto that was in effect for 2 years before I believe the Supreme Court struck it down. He was actually serious about austerity. And guess what? Okay? Guess what? We had 2 back-to-back years of budget surpluses. Maybe we can get back to that one day. So, austerity has nothing to do with the Republican Party. And as a matter of fact, the ones who have a more valid claim on it is the Democrats. Let's go to free trade. Does free trade have anything to do with the Republican Party? Give me a break. This tariff shit is the most embarrassing thing I've ever seen. When we look back on it, it's going to be like, how did the Republican Party not tell Trump to fuck off? And the answer is that he has a cult of personality. And a lot of the Republican Party are cowards. Okay, let's go to high-skilled immigration. Obviously not. You see the $100 per $1,000 per year fee on H-1Bs. You see the cracking down on foreign students who want to come to the United States. You see just the general constant demeaning of immigrants, the constant fear-mongering about immigrants, just in general. This administration is no friend to high-skilled immigration. Let's talk about free markets. No. They're weaponizing the federal government to crack down on businesses who cross their sides, or rather, not even businesses who cross them, but just who won't kowtow to them. You know, you see the weaponization of crony capitalism through the tariffs, where you can get a carve out for tariff if you suck Trump's D. you see the closing, the shutdown of a Danish wind farm in Rhode Island that was providing electricity to 350,000 homes, Ørsted. So they're shutting down clean energy projects just because for cultural reasons. What happened to free markets? He doesn't care about it. So they don't care about free markets. Okay, let's go to the fifth one, civil liberties. Give me a break. Trump does not give a shit about free speech. He tried to weaponize the FCC to kick Jimmy Kimmel off the air. And then he said, after that, let's go after Seth Meyers and Jimmy Fallon. Okay? He actually just genuinely does not give a shit about free speech. Okay? January 6th, he pardoned all the people who were raiding into the Capitol to stop an election. He calls constantly, to a degree literally unprecedented, calls the media the enemy of the people, has advocated for beating up journalists, for, I believe, even shooting journalists. He's no ally of free speech. The Republican Party is no ally of free speech. Okay, and let's end with the last one, the sixth one, social compassion. Does this even need to be said? Donald Trump is the least compassionate president that I think we've had since possibly the slave era. Okay? He is genuinely the least compassionate president I have ever seen. He doesn't give a shit about anybody except himself. He doesn't even give a shit about people who are his ideological allies. He'll just throw you out for no reason. He's a liar. He's a cheater. He steals. He stiffs contractors. Okay? He shills Trump cryptocurrency. He funnels money through he's corrupt. He funnels money through his country club. Okay? He's extraordinarily hateful and divisive. This dude, this doesn't even need an explanation. He's not socially compassionate. So the Republican Party has batted 0 for 6 on what I believe are the pillars of my version of neoliberalism. What this means is that an alternative version is needed. We need a strong alternative to what we have in this administration. And, you might look at the Democratic Party and you might say a lot of them that don't perfectly align with those values. And I agree, we need some work in regards to the austerity front, in regards to the free markets front and stuff. But I am very confident that I'm able to make a solid argument. I would have the communication skills to be able to communicate this version of governance and why the party should adopt a lot of those values. And a lot of them, it might not be that all of them adopt them, but that's okay. I'm okay with the Big Tent coalition. I'm okay if, some people believe it and some don't. But I think it's something that can live in harmony with the general culture and the general ideas that we see in the Democratic Party perfectly. And I just align with the Democratic Party on cultural values. So I'm very confident that this can be integrated into the Democratic Party style of campaigning and governance. Now, if you'll notice, neoliberalism, as I've described to you, has a lot of elements of that kind of like old free market conservatism that we used to see back then. Not the austerity, that's for sure, but the free markets, okay, yeah. Maybe not high-skilled immigration, because even during George Bush, they lowered the H-1B from 195,000 to 95,000, or to 85,000, I believe. So maybe not that one, but the free markets, free trade, yeah. You see civil liberties, yeah. And I would say George Bush, Mitt Romney, those people are socially compassionate. So there's some elements of it. And you might say, so does this represent some level of moderation from what we see in the Democratic Party? And I would say yes. And on that topic of moderation, one of my frustrations that you see with so-called moderate Democrats in the Democratic Party is that they kind of treat moderation as if it's some act, that you're playing an act to appeal to moderate voters. You'll see them talk about poll testing, different ways about talking about issues, messaging, optics, without understanding that Moderation is way more than putting on these different aesthetic moves and changing the way that you talk. It's about a fundamentally different view of the world. And a lot of the reason why they don't understand this is because a lot of them at heart are progressives who just merely care about electability. A moderate Democrat is not a progressive, or rather shouldn't be a progressive that cares about electability. A moderate Democrat should be a fundamentally different style of governance than progressive governance. And the reason why I believe in the values that I've outlined, maybe sure some of it aspects represents trying to push the Democratic Party more in a moderate direction so that they can take power, but it's also because I fundamentally believe in it. And this is what separates real moderates, moderate Democrats like Joe Manchin, from fake moderate Democrats like Biden. Okay, Biden, as we saw from his governance, and I'm not going to punch too hard on him, but he's a progressive who said the words of being a moderate. And as a result, you saw his favorability decline pretty considerably from the top, from the beginning of his administration to when he was actually governing. Because if you read Joe Manchin's book, Dead Center, which I highly recommend, some of his labor policies were quite shameless. His immigration policy, he just bungled it. And he obsessed a little bit too much over some of the social aspects of activism, particularly in, I don't even know how to say this, in being too much caring about the outward aesthetics of representation as opposed to finding meaningful reform to help the peoples that he's trying to help. Okay? And we need moderate Democrats who fundamentally believe in moderate governance as a preferable style of governance to progressive governance. It doesn't mean you can't be friends with them. It can't mean you can't be in the same party. You absolutely can be. And there's aspects of progressive governance that I think are perfectly fine. You see things like universal pre-K and universal kindergarten. I think that's a great idea. And I would like to see that implemented once we get our fiscal situation under control. Okay, that can be a good style of governance and policies that you can implement. And I have no problem with having progressives in the party. It's a coalition. But moderate Democrats should represent a fundamentally different style of governance as an alternative, like a separate style of governance from progressive governance. And that is what I'm going to try to introduce. So those are my ideas that I have right now. Neoliberalism can work. And you might say, well, what about what you talked about previously in some previous videos about rigorous social democracy? I believe in that too. Now, rigorous social democracy would obviously entail a higher level of government spending than neoliberalism. And by the way, I believe in welfare. I believe in it more than a Republican. I believe in it more than a conservative. I believe in welfare not just for productivist sake, as in terms of thinking about it in an ROI point of view, but also just for the sake of redistribution, because $1 for somebody who makes $1 billion is not as meaningful as an extra dollar for somebody who makes 30 grand. I believe in redistribution. I believe in Medicaid. I think it's a clean program. It's a 96% conversion rate, as in you get 96 cents of care for every dollar you put in, which is extraordinarily good. I believe in redistribution, but we have to be smart about it. We have to understand that there's such thing as bloated spending. There's such thing as moral hazard. And we generally want to preserve the dignity of work, as in we don't want to create a social welfare system that is so generous that people think of the government as a provider rather than a helper, that it disincentivizes the dignity of work, which is important in and of itself. But I believe in welfare, I do. But right now, in our current state, we need to focus a little bit more on the austerity aspect of it. And then once we get on firm footing, then we can pursue some aspects of social spending or infrastructural spending, like what you see outlined in Abundance. And I think that can do some really cool things. I think Abundance, you read Abundance, a lot of the ideas they have on like streamlined infrastructure projects and just building things, I think is perfectly cool. Okay, and then things like universal pre-K and kindergarten, I guess that's part of social spending. I think that's good. So rigorous social democracy absolutely can work. Right now, I'm focused on a little bit more of a austerity-based style of governance. And I think that if we can get this done, uncapping the H-1B visa, we need to do that. We need to uncap the H-1B visa. That's a big difference than we saw from, that's a big difference from Bill Clinton, who otherwise checks off so many of what I talked about on what aspects of neoliberalism. It's the reason why I'm a Bill Clinton fan. I'm a Barack Obama fan as well. But Bill Clinton, I'm a fan of Clinton, I'm a fan of Obama, but Bill Clinton really did really match what I'm talking about in regards to real neoliberalism. But he didn't really touch on the high-skilled immigration. I completely understand because the attitudes at the time weren't particularly super pro-immigration. So I understand that. But when we get the opportunity, we need to uncap the H-1B visa, and we can make sure that there's an income floor, of like $80,000 to make sure that, people don't see them as like indentured servants. And there's other reforms we can make, but we need to uncap the H-1B visa because it is steroids for the economy. Unbelievably good. But I think with all this being said, I've said what I need to say. And I really believe in this, not just for electability's sake, but because I actually fundamentally believe in it as a strong form of governance. So those are my thoughts right now, and we're gonna see what happens, and I'll see you guys in the next time we talk. See ya.